Time to get their food order put in, so we should all be good. We'll go ahead and start the festivities for today. My name is Andy Purcell. I'm a business consultant with TCS. Some of you have met, some of you I haven't, so I'll look forward to meeting those that I have not. Al Murray is coming through the door here in about 5 seconds, so he will join us as well. He's one of our customer service managers. You may know Al as well. He's sort of running things behind the scenes once the presentation gets started. So we're here today to talk about 6 surprising secrets about succession and exit. Abby Donnelly is our presenter for today. She is exceptional, taught me everything I know. And she is a CEO coach. I will let her explain more about what that means and what she does. But I wanted to at least introduce her. I will let the fun begin. They will bring food as we're talking. And there will be time for Q&A at the end. And other than that, I will let you go do your thing.
All right, super. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, okay, I want to start out by talking about Tom. Okay, that's not his real name, but I'm gonna talk about Tom to preserve his anonymity. So Tom was running a $12 million business. He had 30 employees. He had one son that was in the business. And he had 2 key employees that had been with him for a very long time. And they were in leadership roles. And they were essentially, the 3 of them were running the company underneath Tom. And Tom had 2 big problems when he came in to meet with me. The first problem was that nobody in the company had the money to buy him out. You know, his son didn't have the money to buy him out. And his 2 key employees didn't have any money to buy him out. And he needed to be bought out because he had some debt in the company. And if they were going to take it over, there needed to be some sort of a plan for some financial remuneration to come through. The other problem that he had was that his successors were just not ready to run the company without him. So when he sat down with me, he said, I need your help. I want you to help me get my 3 successors ready to run the company so that I can begin to step away and eventually fully step away. So I said, great, let's get started. So I'm Abby Donnelly, and I know many of you already, so I'm excited to be here and share what I've got to share today around succession and exit. There's a lot of background about me on this screen, so I'm not going to go through it all, but you can see I've done a tremendous amount of work around succession planning and exit, gotten some certifications and things like that. One of the other things I wanted to point out is that in my time at Sandler Training, which was where I was before I started the Leadership and Legacy Group, I had the benefit of buying into the business as a minority partner and the benefit of selling my shares of the company as a minority partner. And so while I don't have a lot of the firsthand experience that some folks have that are going through succession and exit, I certainly have some of the experience having gone through a buy and a sell myself. A couple of other things about me are listed up there, and you can read those at your convenience. So I'll tell you a little bit about my business, just in case you don't know more about what I do. So I really focus on 4 areas. I work primarily with business owners and their leaders across the company, primarily the ones that are either looking at succession, are candidates for succession, or are, you know, high potentials that the owner wants to develop. And I do a lot of work developing them, preparing them to take over as the leader of the company or to grow into some roles that they haven't been in yet, whether it's a C-suite level position or the CEO or president. I also end up getting involved in a lot of really tricky communications and conversations that have to happen when you're going through a transition of this magnitude. And those can be particularly difficult in a family business situation, but they're difficult in any situation. So I get involved in a lot of those, helping owners make some difficult decisions. And I also help owners and senior executives figure out what their next chapter is going to be. Sometimes what we find is that if an owner has a really clear picture of what that next chapter is going to be, it's a whole lot easier to exit than it is if they're struggling with what to do, because it's easy to stay connected to what you already know than it is to go change your identity and move into that next chapter. The other piece that's on there is strategic planning. I do believe that strategic planning can be an important part of a succession planning process, because the team that's going to be taking over your business needs to be able to have a succession plan that is profitable and sustainable, especially if you're expecting them to pay you out of the proceeds and the profit of the company. So strategic planning sometimes comes into it. So I put this slide in there because I wanted to let you know that there is a method to this madness. This is the Donnelly method. I put this model together about 10 years ago when I realized that businesses that are going through this process really don't have a roadmap. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this model today, but you all should have a copy of my book in front of you. I'm working on my second book right now. It's actually my fifth book, but my second book in the succession and exit world. And the Donnelly method is in there. So if you want to reference it, there should be a copy of it in that book. As we go through the slides today in the program, what I'd really like for you to do is, even if some stuff doesn't seem to apply to you, I'd like you to be honest with yourself, and I'd like you to think about how this can apply to you, because I'd like to believe that there is something in here for everyone, whether you're owning a company and you're looking for a succession, or you advise other owners in the work that you do every day. So think about how it can apply to you. Here's what I'm going to walk through today. I'm going to take you through why this is so important and why it's particularly pervasive right now. I'm going to take you through 5 milestone phases that I've put together that really mark the process that an owner will go through as they start from the day they think about succession all the way through past that exit. I promised you 6 surprising secrets, but when I went through the program, I really was compelled to over deliver. And so I've got 9, and I hope you're okay with that. I'll give you a little bit more than you bargained for. And then what you'll see all the way through here are some recommended action steps that I would offer to you. I would also, Andy said that we're going to have some Q&A at the end, but please stop me as we go through. I'm happy to answer questions along the way. I don't want you to have to hold it if there's something on your mind. So jump in and let's discuss it. So the first thing I want to share with you is that over 60% of owners say that this process is the most challenging experience that they have ever had. And we'll talk about why that is. But what I have found is in conversations, so I'm starting to do interviews for my second book. And what I have found in those interviews is that people compare this process that they're going through and the emotional aspects of this process to their experience getting married, their experience having children. It's that big. So the reason it becomes such a challenging experience is because it's new. Most owners have never sold their business before. There are exceptions out there, some serial entrepreneurs, but the majority of folks are doing this for the first time. And when you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, and you're doing this for the first time after you've had this wildly successful career running and growing a business, it's really uncomfortable. And the stakes are super high. If you make a mistake, you could end up having some really significant tax consequences. You could end up having some very significant issues around what, sorry, I got distracted for a minute there. You could have some significant consequences around who your successor is and whether they're doing the work the way that you expected them to do the work, whether they're growing the business the way that you had in mind, the decisions that they're making. This process can be very complex. It's not as simple as, going out and selling the work that you sell to your customers or clients. What you're selling is something that you've invested your whole life in many cases building into. There's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And so every step of the way, the conversations that we have, the decisions that we make, there's a lot of unknowns in it. So the decisions can be tough. And as with many things of this magnitude, it takes a lot of time. Folks have been working on this. I was at a conference last week in Florida on succession and exit. And the people I was talking to there were saying, I've been doing this for 10 years and they still haven't, finished yet. It's a long process and it costs money. And we've got folks in the room that I know are great advisors that owners will invest with. So you've got to be prepared for that as well. So here's a couple of other statistics I thought you might find interesting. 75% of owners want to sell their business, but guess what? Only 20% of businesses actually sell, which is a frightening figure if you're sitting here thinking you want to sell your business. Now, as a part of that, we're going to get into some additional statistics around what happens to those companies. But the other thing that really struck me is that 12 months after selling their business, 75% of the owners profoundly, not just regretted, but profoundly regretted the decision that they had made. So part of the reason that I am so passionate about this is that nobody who has invested the kind of work that owners have done should ever regret selling their business. They should always feel good, they should feel proud, and they should have a liquidity event that sets them up for success for the rest of their life because they have earned the right to get that. So that's kind of my motivator. A couple of things about those that do sell. So, you can have a sale. I call it a relationship sale in the book. Other people call it an internal sale. So whatever you call it, of those that sell, 23% of sales go to children. Now, the odds on children moving that company forward in the next generation are not very good. The success rate is not very high. So only 23%, only 33% survive to the second generation, and then only 13% to the third and 6% to the fourth generation. There are very, very few companies out there. I've run into a couple that make it to fifth or sixth generation. But what's shocking to me is 13% to third. So I got a call yesterday afternoon from a guy who is in the process of transitioning his business to the third generation. He was the second. And he's talking through, his sons seem very, very capable of running the company. He's super excited about that transition, but it doesn't make it easy, even if everything seems to line up right. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this. Now, you may look up slightly different statistics. I've seen these numbers vary a little bit, but magnitude-wise, they're pretty on track. 41% sell to either key employees or to an ESOP, and ESOPs have become super popular in the last several years. I think there are I saw statistics recently, 7,500 ESOPs now exist. So it's a pretty high number compared to a number of years ago, but still a very small number in terms of the overall. And there are some great benefits to an ESOP, and there are some disadvantages. And I am not an ESOP expert, but there are plenty of people out there that are. So only a third, really 29%, go to a third-party buyer. It's not a super popular approach. And most of my presentation today is going to be focused on the going to children or key employees. So most owners think that the financial part is the really tough part. If I can just get the financials right, then everything else will fall into place. That's the key. But the big elephant in the room, and the secret number one, is that the emotional components, the money, the family dynamics, the identity, and that ownership transfer piece, those are the parts that can totally derail the absolute best laid plans. So making owners aware that not only is this stuff emotional, but we have got to get to a place where we're sort of normalizing the conversation that we can talk about this stuff. Because an owner who can talk about the emotions is far more likely to have a successful outcome than someone that either pushes it away or stuffs it inside, or just simply allows it to play out wherever those emotions take them. So that's why I think that this secret number one is probably the most important piece. Now, most owners consider their business like a fifth baby. And so here are 4 babies, and then I had to use the TCS front of the building to show the other baby, because that's what it's been to a lot of folks that have grown up in the business. It's their first baby, second baby, third baby, whatever. The question for any owner that is going through this is, who are you going to call when you're struggling with the emotions, when you're uncertain about the direction? Because if you don't make right decisions, it's easy for things to blow up. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you've got trusted advisors that you can depend upon to work you through, whether it is the financial piece or it's, the family dynamic. I have one son that's going to be great at running the business, I have a daughter that I think will make a great CEO. So I could do a president and a CEO. But I have one son that is not a good fit for the business and wants to be in it, but is not going to be in a leadership role. How do I have those conversations? Those get really tricky. I have somebody that I am interested in selling the business to, but it's a key employee and my kids are in the business. How do I handle that? So there's a whole lot that you can be dealing with that you need to work through. I talked about 5 milestones. So these are my milestone phases that I think all owners go through. And I'm just going to talk through them so that you're aware of them. The first milestone is where the business owner decides that it is time to get serious about planning succession. And one of the cautions around this is secret number 2, beware of the rolling 10. So the rolling 10 is a phrase that was coined a number of years ago by a guy out of Atlanta. His name is Patrick Ungashik, and he's in this space as well. He works on succession planning and exit. He's a financial advisor, but he does a lot of advising on exiting your business. And the rolling 10 is where you go and you ask somebody, you ask an owner, so when are you planning to exit your business? And they say, 5 to 10 years. And then you see them again 5 years later and you say, so when are you planning to exit your business? And they say, 5 to 10 years. And you can guess where that goes. And so when I say get serious about planning their exit and succession, what I mean by that is they're ready to actually do the work. They're out of the rolling 10 and they're into putting something tangible in place. Doesn't mean it's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. It could still take 10. But there's a tangible plan to get there. So phase number 2 is where they start seeking that right successor or buyer. So they're starting to figure out, is it going to be a family member? Is it going to be a key employee? Or do I want to look outside the business? Now, remember, Tom came to me because he wanted it to be someone inside the company. He wanted it to be his son and those 2 key employees. It doesn't always work out that way. And what's it called when you, spoiler alert, the spoiler alert is it didn't work out that way for Tom either. And we'll get to that a little bit later. The third milestone phase is where either you start developing your successors for that next role, or you realize that they're not going to be the right ones. You may still develop them because you want a strong management team in place, but you start looking outside for a buyer. And so you may be into due diligence with that buyer. The fourth phase is where you're 6 months from transition. So you're in that final stretch where you may still not leave the company, but you're in that phase where you're going to turn it over in about 6 months, the lion's share of responsibility. And then the last phase is where you're into your next chapter. Again, doesn't mean that you have to fully leave, but you are in that next chapter and you figured out what that phase is going to look like. So first thing to do is figure out with what matters most. And the reason that this is so important is because if owners are anchored in what matters most, then you can always go back to that when things get tricky, when things get dicey, when they get uncomfortable. You can always go back to that. Now, you might change what matters most, and that's okay. But what I find in the work I do with owners is that often they're knee deep in the process when they first start to think about what matters most. And that's really too late because they've missed the opportunity to get grounded in their own core values, their own sort of priorities. So some of the things to think about in what matters most, and this is secret number 3, is do I want an internal or an external sale? Okay, you don't have to know the answer like Tom. Tom said, I want an internal sale, but later he had to change it because it wasn't going to work. But starting somewhere is an important first step. If you're going to go internal, who are your candidates? You don't have to know who the actual person's going to be, but you need to put your candidate list together. If it's going to be external, you might want to think about, do I want a strategic sale? Do I want a financial sale? Those are different buyers, and you're going to be looking for different characteristics based on that particular decision. How much money do you need? to fund your retirement, because it would be a shame to leave money on the table that you need. But the other question that's also important is, how much money do you want? And there is no shame in wanting more money. But what I find is that the vast majority of owners that I work with, it is not about maximizing how much they can get out of the business. It is about setting up their company for success so that they have a legacy they can be proud of. And they have enough money to be able to step away and live the rest of their life at least comfortably, if not very, very well. So that's sort of an important question. The timing, are you thinking 1 year? That's pretty quick. Are you thinking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Those are all, reasonable things. 3 to 5 is probably on the tight end, but it's a reasonable amount of time. And then thinking about, what about the culture matters to you? Because a new owner or a new leader, if it's someone from within, has got to be someone that's going to keep the important components of the culture that you have worked to put in place. So you've got to think about, what are those components? And then the last piece is, well, the employees as well. The last piece is, what is your next role going to be? So I work with a lot of folks that are happy to move on and be kind of a consultant to their new leader and owner. I work with some folks that want to stay on in a designated role. The key there is, you've got to have a designated role. You can't just kind of show up, because if you do, it's probably going to be uncomfortable. Maybe you and your successor can figure out how that works, but the employees that work for you aren't going to have any idea who to go to when they have questions. And you may end up finding like a mom and dad situation where it's like, well, I'll just ask mom. Oh, mom said no, so I'll go to dad. Well, so that just gets really messy. But if you have a well-defined role, then you can make that clear to everybody, and it will be much, much smoother for all, yourself included. And then your next chapter. So figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of the time that you have now freed up. So those are some pretty important questions. They're hard questions, and you may not know the answer, but I promise you, if you don't start with this, it's going to come back and it's going to bite you. So start there. Okay, whoops, slow here. All right, so the next piece is, your successor, whoever you choose, has to be qualified. You are not going to turn your business over to somebody that is not going to run the company profitably and sustainably. So a couple of things to think about from a qualification standpoint. Obviously, the person needs to want it, but I say obviously, and I can't tell you how many conversations I have had with owners who say, I want my daughter to take over this company. And then I talk to the daughter and she says, I'm not really all that interested in taking over the company, but I know my dad so badly wants me to do it. Well, those are conversations that you need to have together, but there are also conversations like with Tom. When I sat down with Tom's son, he said, I'm not ready to tell my dad this, and I'm not ready for you to tell him, but I don't want to run this company. I don't want it. And I said, great. So let's talk about how we're going to have that conversation and when we're going to have that conversation, because you can't wait a whole lot longer. He is barreling down the path of making this happen. So they got to want it. They have to be able to pay enough for it. And the recent way that I heard it described is, you want to charge them enough so it hurts, but not so much that it debilitates if you're doing an internal sale and you can afford to do that. On the other hand, you want to get enough out of it that you are feeling good about your take on it. It's got to be someone that's going to pull the trigger. And I remember, Steve knows me from my Sandler days, when I was trying, so does Barry actually, when I was debating whether to buy into the Sandler training franchise, I kept going back and forth and back and forth. And finally, my business partner, Josh, sort of put a stake in the ground and said, you're going to have to decide. You're either in or out. We can't have this waffling all the time. So was I willing to pull the trigger? And that's when I did it. So, they've got to be capable. You've got to trust them. But if you don't have some of these criteria in place, no deal. Okay. Another thing that a technique that I would recommend for you is identifying what are the key roles in your company. You may have some leadership positions that are important, but not every leadership position is key. So for example, if you're a sales-oriented business, then your chief sales officer or VP of sales is going to be a critical position. But you may also have a chief chief HR person or a chief administrative officer or something like that. They may or may not be key. It just depends on your business and what it takes to run your company. You may also, you'll see some of the stars further down there. You may also have some critical positions that are deep in the organization. So for example, I work with a lot of companies in the construction industry. Their estimator is critical, but that's usually not a C-suite or even a VP level role, but it is critical. So spending some time thinking about which roles are critical. And then as you think about developing successors, thinking about not just the successor to the top level role, but all the way through, because there's going to be daisy chain and your whole organization is going to need to grow. So who's ready now for more responsibility and how can you orchestrate that? Who's going to be ready in 3 years? And what are the skill gaps that you have that absolutely need to be closed? And then what are the culture fit gaps that you need? So I've had situations where the best successor from many of these criteria is not a good culture fit. They're not leading the culture that the organization has been founded on. And so the owner's really struggling with, like, what do I do? So you have two choices. Either they're not the right successor, or you've got to figure out how to help them become a better culture fit. And either one of those is fine. One of the other things I wanted to point out, I may have it on a later slide, is that it generally takes 3 to 5 years to develop somebody that is VP or C-suite level to be able to run the company at the CEO level. So that is not an insignificant amount of time. And that depends upon you actually doing intentional development, which we'll get to shortly. So I would recommend, as you're looking at your org chart and you're looking at your people, I would encourage you to look beyond the obvious. We all tend to have the people that show up as obvious candidates for more responsibility, obvious players to take on, maybe the CEO role one day. But what I would encourage you to do is to look beyond who's obvious for particular roles. Think about your people in terms of skills and experience and strengths, and look for what their potential is, not just what they've already demonstrated. So I don't know how many of you have seen the tool that's on this document. On the slide. It's called a 9-box. And there's something similar to it in my book. I wish I had known about the 9-box when I wrote the book, because I would have put it in there, but I didn't have that. So the 9-box is where you look at potential and you look at performance in their current role. And obviously, high potential, low performance, high performance. So the top corner box is somebody that has high potential and high performance. They're a rock star. You want to develop them and grow them and help them continue to be wildly successful. The high potential but low performance is somebody that is probably in the wrong role. So you want to help them get into a role where they can be successful if one exists at your company. The high performance but low potential, they're doing a great job where they are. Keep them happy, but they're probably not going to grow into higher level roles. So what I recommend is that you use this 9-box to take a look at your organization. You may have some diamonds in the rough deep in the organization that have huge potential, but you have not tapped into it yet, and they're sitting in a role stagnating. So 25% of the population of the workforce is over age 55 now. 40% of that population, as you probably know, looking around most businesses these days, are millennials. And 66%, 2/3 of the successors won't be ready for at least 3 to 5 years. So in the next 3 to 5 years. So there's a lot of development work that has to happen. My recommendation is invest in what I call intentional development. And there's 2 sort of broad categories of intentional development. One is experience-based, and that's really about giving people experiences to learn and understand what they can do better, and to learn and understand and get experience in the work and the direction that you want them to grow. Those are very low cost kinds of things, and I'll talk about a few on the next slide. The other is training and coaching, and we're all familiar with that. Like you can send someone to a training class or a workshop or something like that. You can hire a coach to help them. Those are much more expensive, but the vast majority of best development is that experiential based training. So let's take a look at some of those things. So there's a whole list of stuff that I recommend. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them here. The ones in red. So you can take your folks on a tour, and I'll give you an example. When I was with Procter & Gamble, one of the things that we did was we modeled manufacturing after the folks that do NASCAR. And so we got a tour in the pit. I didn't actually get to go, but a lot of people got to go for a tour in the pit, and they could see how they do rapid changeovers. And it was life-changing. The folks that went, they came back and they totally redid the equipment. So instead of taking an hour to change over, after that tour, they started using their creative juices and they could change over something in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. So a tour of someone else's organization gets light bulbs going. A day in the life, spending some time with somebody that's in a different role within or outside of your company. Serving on a nonprofit board is great experience to see how do you influence people when they don't work for you. You know, how do you get them to think differently? Training somebody else. If you have to train someone else, you have to learn it yourself. Doing a pilot project or a SWAT team or something like that, that forces you to be on a project team with other people you might not work with every day and figure out something new that the business needs. So those are examples. The bottom set are really about doing the work, but it's doing the work with intention. It's being proactive about thinking through how do you help the successors or the people that you're developing do their job better by helping them learn something through that work, okay? Or do where you want to take them. All right, so secret number 6. This is a tug of war here. And this is really, are you leading the transition or are you leading the business? So owners have spent their whole life leading the business, or at least since they've been the CEO or president of the company, leading the business. But now, as you start to get serious about succession, you've got to start leading the transition, and that will take away from your leading the business. But don't worry, that's okay, because you have people that you want to start leading more of the business. So if you can start to transition your responsibilities to some others that are developmental for them, and you can put your energy into leading the transition part, it's a win for everybody. But what often happens, and I'm going to ask Nikki to help me demonstrate this, what often happens is that, you know, I'll give Nikki some responsibility. Here, take it. Right. And so I don't let it go as the owner. And that makes it difficult for everybody. It doesn't free you up as the owner to do something different, but it also doesn't allow the Nickies of the world to learn what they need to learn to be able to step into your shoes. Uh-oh. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have used this.
Took control.
You did, and you almost got it. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So lead the transition, lead the business versus lead the business. So secret number 7 is put together what I call a successor readiness checklist. This checklist needs to have on it, what are your non-negotiables? Like, what are the things that you need to see in order for you to feel the least bit comfortable turning over your baby to another caretaker? Okay, so things to think about on your non-negotiable list are things like, what are the behaviors that you need to see? They could be culturally designed, or they could be behaviors that are important for them to be able to take on that leadership role. Maybe it's working with an external partners or something like that. What are the skills that they need to be able to demonstrate for you to know they've got this? What's the experience they need to have for you to say, yes, they've lived through this before. I know that they can live through and lead it next time. Or maybe they've already led it. And then what are the results that they need to demonstrate? So some of those things are going to be non-negotiables, like you will not walk away until they're there. Some of those might be just high priority for you. And there are certainly going to be plenty that are going to be mid priority or low priority. The reason I say this list is so important is because what often happens is without this list, you don't really know where the goal line is. And more importantly, they don't either. You know, the idea of saying, I'll know when you're ready, I'll know it when I see it, really isn't fair to anybody. Now, that doesn't mean you have to turn over complete control to them at a certain timeline, but it needs to be a set of criteria that they understand and you understand. And you need to be super careful not to keep moving the goal line, because I see that happen a lot. It's like, yeah, I know I said that this was important and that was important. And you've done that really well. But now I just thought about this other thing that I want you to demonstrate also. So moving the goal line will simply frustrate them and basically cause them to be, what I'm looking for, disincentivized, disenfranchised, those words. So secret number 8 is about your readiness. We've talked about the successor readiness and that checklist, but secret number 8 is about how do you get ready for this? And so there's a lot around defining a new identity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this on the next couple of slides. But this is a significant transition for most owners. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I have asked a zillion times in giving presentations like this. What do you think are the top 3 things that owners say they're going to do in their next chapter? Throw them out.
Started another business.
Okay, I don't hear that as much, but that's actually becoming more popular lately. What are some others? I'm going to improve my golf game. I'm going to travel. Well, I hear that some too, but it's not my top 3. You're missing one big one. I can't
spend time with the grandkids.
Yes, I'm going to spend time with family. Absolutely. So those are the top 3: golf, travel, spend more time with family. And then others will talk about, I want to get involved in a nonprofit organization. I want to mentor somebody. I want to start another business. I want to be a professor at a university. People throw all those things out. The problem with those is that they're most of those top 3 are not sufficient to provide new meaning in this stage of your life. So when you're thinking about what that next chapter looks like, you've got to come up with something that is going to provide meaning and purpose and relevance. I talked to a whole bunch of owners that have left their company, and the number one thing they say to me, if they didn't do this work well, is I need to find a way to stay relevant. My business doesn't need me anymore. My family doesn't want me around all the time. You know, I come home and my wife's like, oh, you know. So I need something to feel relevant. And you can only play so much golf and you can only travel so much before you want to come home and, you know, have something that means more. So I want to talk a little bit about this with you. There are a number of unspoken questions, and part of my quest and part of why I'm writing this next book is because I really feel like we need to normalize the conversation about the emotions. And part of this emotional process is around the exit piece of it. So the questions that come up for people that I think continue to plague many owners is, 1, will this business be okay without me? And even if you can look at your successor, or maybe you sell it to a third party and they got it, it still feels like, but is it really okay? Is it really still working the way that I wanted it to? People wonder, what will my family and friends think of me? So I had a conversation last week with a president of a company. He was not an owner because it was an ESOP, but he and I were on the phone. And one of the things he said to me is, it's amazing when I talk to people because I don't know how to introduce myself. You know, I can say I used to be this, or I ran this company, or I founded this business, but I need a new way of talking about who I am. And I haven't figured that out yet. And so it feels like I'm still living in the past. And I kind of am, because I'm still a sort of identity related to that old role that I played. Now I'm going to take a side note here and tell you, incidentally, there is a gender difference here. So statistically, women do not have as difficult a time with this as men. And the theory is, I haven't seen what the research proves out. I don't know that there's been any research, but the theory is that women over the course of their life have taken on many, many different roles and often have been in and out of the workforce for children. They have reinvented themselves after they come back, having spent some time home with kids. And so they are just much more comfortable, moving into this new phase. So a lot of what I'm working on is really more of a challenge for men, although I do have plenty of women that, struggle with this as well. Some other questions that I know clients that talk to me talk about is, do I have value if I don't bring home a paycheck? One of the folks I talked to a couple of weeks ago, he said, Abby, it's the weirdest thing to not have a paycheck. He said, I've been out of the workforce now, 6-9 months, and it just feels weird. I mean, we have plenty of money, we're fine, but it feels weird because I'm not seeing it coming in, And then the last question I think is also very profound, like not just what if nobody calls me and they call my successor. I can guarantee you they're not going to call you. They are going to call your successor. And if they are calling you, there's a bigger problem because you have not transitioned it very well. So these are some of the unspoken questions. And business owners don't tend to talk about these things with anyone but maybe their spouse, maybe their attorney or their CPA, and people like me who they might hire to help with that kind of stuff. So the last 6 months, and I really strongly recommend doing this work the last 6 months before you exit your company, is about figuring out what that next chapter looks like. So this model there, you can't see it, but I'll talk through, what the model is. This model is my model that I work with clients on to help them figure out what is going to be that meaningful, relevant, rewarding next chapter. And on the left side of the model, Venn diagram kind of a piece, that's really all about helping the owner identify what are their favorite strengths, the ones that they love to use, because why on earth would you want to go into retirement and not use your favorite strengths and just use strengths that you don't enjoy using? It is about your passions or your motivators, really identifying, sort of the underlying things that motivate you. Like one of the things I can speak to with Steve about, and Steve and I know each other well, is one of the underlying motivators for Steve is he loves developing people and seeing that aha moment when they not only get something, but they're able to get it and then put it into action and then succeed. Like it's a joyful moment for him. And each owner, each of you, each of the owners that I work with have many of those underlying things, or at least several of them. And the idea is if you can pull out what they are and you can build that into your next chapter in a meaningful way, then suddenly everything becomes rewarding because you're doing the kind of thing that really drives your motivators and passions. The last piece of it, the third piece of the Venn diagram, is around lifestyle priorities. So, it could be anything from, in fact, after today, after this session, I have a meeting with a former client he's retiring in 2 weeks. And one of the things that he said to me when we were working together is he said, Abby, all I want to do from a lifestyle priority is I don't want to have to wake up to the alarm at 5:30. I wake up early anyway. On the weekends, I'm up by 6. But I'd really love to just sleep in until 6. Others say I want to travel the world, great, go do that. So lifestyle priorities is an important component. You see at the bottom of the slide, I have avoid ADDO. So what happens, and I can't find the study right now, but years ago when I was doing research for the book that you have in front of you, I found a study from the Harvard School of Public Health that said that the rate for owners, for high caliber leaders in companies, it could also be C-suite folks, the rate of alcoholism, drug abuse, obesity, and depression skyrocket within that first year of exiting the business. And the reason is because if they don't have something meaningful to go to, then they're sort of stuck. But the other reason is that if they don't have something to re-immerse themselves in from an identity standpoint, then they lose their community. Think about it, you're not going to the office every day. So that's a community you've been with. When you show up for a nonprofit board that you're on, and people look at you and you're like, yeah, you used to be the owner of that company, but you have no power anymore. Now I got to get the new owner on this board because they're not going to be funding you, or you can't fund this. So the power goes away, the status goes away, the identity goes away. So it's really about avoiding those consequences. Yep.
My father ran a real estate agency in Richmond. And he suffered a disability that he could never work ever. And he actually went into deep depression, thought about suicide. He put his whole identity into that work.
No. And you know what, Wayne? That is exactly what gets me so motivated about this, because it is so hard to know that somebody went through something like that. And if they had the support that they needed, that's why these conversations are so important. If they have the support that they need to navigate through it, your dad might not have been able to avoid the disability, but he might have been able to get the support to figure out how to create a new identity that meant something to him. And as much as we love families and travel and golf, it's often not going to be enough. It's not 100%, but it's often not going to be enough. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry for your dad, it's hard. So the last 6 months that you're going through this identity transition and figuring out your next chapter, you need to be stepping up and having the folks that you're putting in place leading the company. Their work is to take that on. And that's secret number 9. So I'm going to summarize. I'm going to put all these things up. Oh, woo. There we go. All right. So in summary, I've gone through 9 secrets. They may not be in all this order, but the 9 things that I've covered are: it's emotional. Be really careful about the rolling 10. Don't put this off. Just get grounded in what matters most. Look beyond the obvious for the candidates in your company that might be developable, even if it's not as the next CEO, but someone that you can develop. Lead the transition versus leading the business. You know, you may have to do some of both for a while. Invest in intentional development. Be very proactive in figuring out what are those right experiences. Do the successor readiness part that you own and support, the owner readiness part that you own and support the successor readiness. And then do your own next chapter work so that they can do their next chapter work, which will be within the company. So I will now take any questions. I didn't hear any along the way, but I'm happy to take them now. And how are we doing on time? Oh,
You're good.
good.
Right on time.
There's no questions right now with the virtual guests.
Okay.
Some people request your book. So
Okay,
that's
good.
a nice thing. So
Excellent. We will get that to them.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you're so good at consulting and helping business leaders with their succession plans. Just curious, what is one day, like 80 years from now, what does it look like for you?
You know, it's a great question. And frankly, I get asked that a lot because people are thinking, well, are you going to eat your own, eat your own stuff? And the truth is, for me, first of all, I don't have a dream to own a company. And I think that's one of the key differences. For me, it's always been about owning and running a practice. And if you've read the E-Myth Revisited, which I bet many of you have, you probably remember there's the baker, and then there's the business owner that hires bakers to do the work so that they can focus on running and growing the company. I'm the baker. I love doing the work. And when I started the business in 2012, I really gave some serious thought. And I actually went through a program to help me figure out, do I want to be the baker or do I want to be the owner that builds a company that is saleable one day? And at the end of that process, I know what I'm passionate about. I know what my motivators are. And if I can wake up every morning and get to do this work, there isn't a better thing for me. So I have no expectation of selling it. And I will be one of those 75 to 25% that don't sell, that just shut it down. But I'm not shutting down a company. I feel like I'm more shutting down a practice. And I see a difference between the two. So yeah, thanks. What other questions?
So if somebody wanted to engage with you, maybe what's our first step?
Yeah, so a great first step is, let me know you want to talk. And I'm happy to set up a meeting. I'll talk to anybody about any of this stuff with really no expectation that it's going to go anywhere. In fact, the conversation that I had yesterday afternoon was someone that was referred to me, and they have a business. They're on their way out. They have 2 sons that are in the business, running the company already. And when he described what he needed, I said, you don't need me, you need somebody else. So if you don't need me, I'm going to refer you to the person that you do need. But if you do need me, we'll figure out, is this the right time? And do I have the right skill set? And are you ready? Because that's the other piece. If you're not ready, then it all comes down to being at that right stage in the process. So I'm happy to talk to anybody along the way. And I feel very comfortable that collectively we'll figure out if there's work to be done or not at this time even. So thank you for asking.
I have a question.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
We'll get Wayne next.
You talk about time of the owner's role in exit strategy. How often do you find in your role, it's not the owner's timeline, but maybe the industry's timeline?
Well, that's a really good point. And a lot of owners try to create a timeline that matches either the industry dynamics, the economy, or something like that. And there's 2 schools of thought on that. One school of thought is, don't do that. Just sell it when you're ready, and you will find either the right buyer or you'll make the right transition. There's a whole other school of thought that says, be sale ready. In fact, sometimes when I've done presentations like this before, I show a picture of a gym bag. And the idea there is that I keep a gym bag in my car when I was going to the gym on a regular basis. Now I'm working out at home, but I used to keep a gym bag in my car ready to go, because even if I had a packed day, back-to-back meetings, if something canceled and I suddenly had this window of time, well, if I didn't have my gym bag, I couldn't make it to the gym. But if my gym bag's in my car, I can get out there. So the same kind of analogy is, if your business is always sale ready, then when the economy or the industry makes a shift and it's the time, you're good to go. So
but making a business sell ready is a long process.
it is.
It's not one you do in a few weeks.
That's right. But if you start now, then you're going to be ready 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that when the industry changes, you will be in that position. And there's some really good material out there for like value building. You probably saw on the first slide, I have a value builder certification. It's all about how do you build that value into your business. Well, you know what? My theory is, why not build the value in now? And then you always have a valuable company, whether you keep it forever, whether you succession to an employee or a family member, or you sell it. Go ahead.
You bring up one more question.
Sure.
You bring up some good points about identity of a person. In my case, I've been a serial entrepreneur. You hit real hard with me. So I compliment you on identifying that. You're right. The identity of after the sale is very difficult.
That's why so many profoundly regret it. It's like, what have I just done? I have turned over this business and I wasn't ready. So it's tough. And that's exactly why it's so important to me to talk about it, So Wayne, you had a question or comment?
It was more comment, but to reinforce something you said about family-owned businesses. I had a client that he bought the business from his father, founded the business, very successful, probably about 50 employees. But his father wouldn't stop coming in. Okay?
Yeah.
And he kept coming in every day.
Yeah.
And all the long-term employees kept going to the father,
Yes.
okay? To
Yes.
get answers. And it frustrated this fellow David very much. And he had conversations, he had a third party, the attorney talked to the
I know.
father. But the father's identity was in that business, and he was afraid if he didn't come in, that he would not have an identity. Well, finally, my client David had a national company come along and offer him a nice sale. He was 55, he had no intentions of selling, but it was the only way he could, I hate to say it, get rid of his father.
Yep. Yeah, it's really difficult. One of the things, you can't make someone do what they don't want to do. I mean, that's just a fact. You can't. And so one of the things that I hear a lot from owners who are exiting, or even folks that don't own the company, because I hear it from, presidents and CEOs. Well, can I still have an office? Can I still have an office? Because if I have some place I can go to that feels comfortable, that feels like home. And I've heard stories. In fact, I've got a client whose father said, please just let me keep my office, and most successors are perfectly happy to have them come into the office if the role distinctions are clear, if the boundaries are clear, if the exiting owner, when people come to them, say, I'm sorry, that's not a decision for me, that's not a conversation, you need to go to the current president or CEO. If they can manage that, then I've seen many situations where the old owner, the exiting owner, continues to show up. They come in, they read the paper, they chit chat a little bit, not too much to take away from, the folks doing their work every day, but it's a part of their life. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. The key is clarity on role and boundaries. And if everybody knows that, it can work really well. If they don't, it can be a real challenge. Yeah. Good.
I'm
Yeah.
full of questions.
All right, bring them on.
Start charging him.
I'm gonna ask an unfair question. You've been doing this since 2014, you said?
Well, I actually have been doing it a really long time under the Sandler umbrella, but then I started my own.
That's like 15 years.
Yeah.
In the 15 years you've been doing this, and this is a two-part question. How many in 15 years have been extremely successful stories that you could maybe not mention a name, but you say that was a out of the ballpark success? The other side of the coin, how many were failures? What I really want to hear about is what caused the failures, either on your part or the business owner's part. What caused those failures to happen? How that happened? And I know you got one in your mind.
Well, I actually have a couple in my mind, and the majority of the ones that failed that were internal sales, to a key employee or family member, they failed because either the communications between the exiting person, oftentimes, parent, and the internal transfer next generation CEO, they failed. And the goal line moved. They couldn't communicate about, what the transition timeline was going to be. There were all kinds of ways that those communications just derailed. And in fact, I've had a couple of things that I would deem successes today, but they were so far down the path of a failure, but we were able to turn them around. I've got a great example that comes to mind where the father owned the company, the mother was in the business. The daughter was in the business, and there was a key employee in the business who was a critical part of the company. And they had decided that the daughter would be a 51% owner. The key employee would be a 49% owner. Everyone seemed comfortable with that. And we started walking down that path, and those communications did not happen like they were supposed to. And the daughter came into my office one day and she said, I can't do it anymore. I cannot do it anymore. If it does not change now, I'm done. I'm getting a job, I'm moving on or whatever. And so my job is less, what I prefer to do is to coach her on how to have those conversations. And I coached her on how to have the conversation. She went back and she had it with her parents, and her parents said, you're absolutely right. We will change. We will fix it. And they did. And it's a huge success story now. So that's one of them, is the communications just derail, because there's all this other family stuff oftentimes that comes in there. But the second one is that to the extent that the exiting owner will not go away, will not define those boundaries or whatever, that can really create some chaos and havoc as
I
well.
see that being true in a family. You talk about two different transitions. One where you're selling to a third party and then you're told to go away. And then one that's a family dynamic, transition from one family member to other family members.
Yeah.
Of the clients you've had, is it 50-50, is it 75-25? How many are the family side versus the business that says, hey, I just want to sell it and walk away, do my 1-year term and go off my merry way?
Yeah, I would say the vast majority, probably 80-90% of mine are the internal sale.
Okay, really?
Yeah, yeah. And I've had a couple that have started internal and gone external, and those are the ones that, I've spoken to. So in the past 3 to 5 years, I've probably only had 2 that have gone to a third party sale. And both of those, the situation with one of them I've shared a little bit about today. The other situation was super interesting because the guy also hired me. He said, it's not an internal sale to a family member. I don't have any family that wants it. My kids don't want it. But there was somebody that he knew that was in the industry and they had been talking. And where it started to derail was that the owner said to me, I've got somebody, I don't need your help with anything. I said, great. So have you had the conversation about where the money's going to come from? Can they pay you enough? How much do you want? Have you had the conversation about what role he's going to be in and how that transition is going to happen? And he said, oh, don't worry. I've had all that. So I said, well, why don't you just confirm that? Just do me a favor and confirm it. And so turns out when he went back to confirm it, this is a multi-million-dollar sale value, and the new owner could only come up with $150,000. And it's like, where do you think the rest of this money is going to come from? And so the outgoing owner asked that question, and he said, well, I just figured you'd finance it for me over years. And he's like, do you know how many years that's going to take? And so that was a time when he then said, I got to go to a third party. So I would say that all of mine have started with, I want to do an internal sale, but they've only become an external one because it didn't work.
Because the money wasn't there.
Either the money wasn't
something
there or
failed.
something failed. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about what ended up happening with Tom?
Yeah. So Tom, thank you. So Tom ended up going third party sale. We almost derailed another time, which if the story will probably make it into my book. So it was on its way. It was doing well at first. Then the first set of buyers that he had were actual people. Couldn't find enough money to pay him what it was worth. He would have walked away with almost nothing by the time he resolved any debt, that kind of thing, and taxes. Then he went to a private equity buyer. Everything seemed to be going really well, great fit, great culture, all that kind of stuff was going well, until one day Tom walks into my office and he says, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this. And he sat down and he was ready to pull the plug because he was so frustrated with the due diligence process and all the questions and all the work that he had to do. And he was at the point where it's like, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And so we talked through, wait a minute, I took him back to what matters most. I got him regrounded in his, his stuff. And we talked through how to have the conversation that he needed to have to move through it. And that's what he ended up doing. And it is such a good deal on the back end. 3 years later, he is still in the business running the company, but he doesn't have any of the risk or any of the debt like he had before. So there's somebody else that has taken all that on. He's got all kinds of resource support to help, and he couldn't be happier. And you know what else? His son and his 2 key employees are doing super well. So they're flourishing in this new environment. They've grown the business and the buyers are thrilled. So, I mean, it worked out great. And he kind of knew that, but you get all emotional about it. And so anyway, well, I am happy to take additional questions, but I know you probably have work days to go on to, and so do I. So
That's
thank
right.
you
I
so
didn't want to
much.
keep you too long.
Yeah,
But
no,
thank you
I
so much. That
understand.
was wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
obviously everything that we had hoped that it would be. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Hopefully, if you do have questions, you can reach out to Abby and she'll hand out a card or give you an email address that may be on some of the original invitation, and it's right here behind me. So Any questions, please contact her directly or ask her after this. Thank you so much. We will be having additional events coming up. Hopefully you can attend one of those as well. We'd love to see you again. And anything TCS can do, as always, please contact me or Al or James if he's who you work with. And we will look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Thank you.
And I hope lunch was good.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Ashley. She was very, very helpful behind the